No one dared approach the Black Zone until Earth built a capital there. The void screamed in colors that had no names. Sector designation Omega-7, more commonly known as the Black Zone, stretched across 17 parsecs of space where reality bent like heated metal. Stars flickered between existence and memory, their light arriving centuries before they were born. Gravitational currents flowed backward, dragging matter into impossible spirals that dissolved into quantum foam. No ship had ever returned from its borders. No probe had transmitted back even static. In the galactic assembly chambers on Nexus Prime, the debate had raged for 3 standard cycles. The hemispherical amphitheater buzzed with the voices of 47 species, each delegate hovering in environmental pods suited to their biology. At the center, Chancellor Vexitar of the Hegemony raised all 6 of his arms for silence. "The motion stands before us." His voice resonated through neural translators, reaching every corner of the vast chamber. "The Black Zone remains classified as absolute prohibition territory. No civilization may claim sovereignty within its boundaries." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The Zephyrian representative, a crystalline form refracting the chamber's ambient light, chimed her objection. "The quantum instabilities alone make colonization impossible. We've lost 14 research expeditions attempting mere proximity scans." From the upper tiers, Ambassador Kralthek of the Dominion Federation leaned forward, his scaled features twisted in what passed for a smile among his kind. "The humans have submitted a petition for exclusive territorial rights to the entire zone. Perhaps they've finally lost what little sanity their species possessed." Laughter echoed from several pods, the chittering of insectoid delegates, the harmonic resonance of the gas giant dwellers, the low rumbles of the silicon-based Foundry Collective. Only one section remained silent. In the small, modest pod marked with Earth's blue-green insignia, Ambassador Kai Nakamura sat perfectly still. His weathered face, etched with lines from decades of service, showed no reaction to the mockery. Beside him, technical advisor Dr. Zara Okafor adjusted her tablet, fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed data streams the other delegates couldn't access, wouldn't want to access. Chancellor Vexitar's primary eyes focused on the human delegation. "Ambassador Nakamura, surely this is some clerical error. Your species cannot seriously intend to establish presence in a region that has destroyed every probe we've sent into it." Nakamura stood slowly, his movements deliberate. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had stared into the abyss and found it wanting. "Chancellor, distinguished delegates, Earth formally requests exclusive territorial rights to Sector Omega-7, including all subsectors and associated dimensional anomalies. We intend to establish our new colonial capital there within 18 standard months." The silence that followed was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of absolute bewilderment. Then came the explosion of voices, a cacophony of outrage, disbelief, and what sounded distinctly like species-specific expressions of mental instability. "Impossible!" screeched the Avian Collective representative. "Suicide!" boomed the Thermal Zone delegation. Chancellor Vexitar slammed his ceremonial staff against the podium, the resonant chime cutting through the chaos. "Ambassador, with respect to your species' achievements, the Black Zone's dimensional instabilities would tear apart any conventional matter within hours. Our best scientists estimate that even approaching the outer boundaries requires technology centuries beyond current capabilities." Dr. Okafor whispered something to Nakamura, her dark eyes bright with what looked almost like anticipation. He nodded once. "Chancellor," Nakamura said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet, "we're not asking for permission to approach the Black Zone. We're informing you that we're already there." The statement hung in the air like a challenge to physics itself. "That's impossible." Vexitar's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Our long-range sensors show no human presence within 50 parsecs of the zone boundaries. Nakamura smiled. Not the diplomatic expression he'd worn for years in these chambers, but something sharper, more genuine. Chancellor, when did you last calibrate those sensors? 6 months earlier, in the deep cold between the Outer Rim territories and the Black Zone's event horizon, Lieutenant Commander Alexis Torino stood on the observation deck of the U.S. Prometheus, watching space bend. The ship hung motionless relative to conventional space-time, but through the reinforced transperisteel viewports, reality writhed like a living thing. Streams of dark matter flowed in impossible geometries, creating aurora borealis effects that painted the void in shades of ultraviolet and infrared that human eyes weren't designed to process. Jesus Christ, whispered Navigator Devon Cross, his hands trembling as he tried to input course corrections into a computer that kept telling him they were simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. The gravitational readings they're not just off the charts, Commander, they're rewriting the charts. Torino didn't take her eyes off the view. At 32, she was young for a deep space command, but her psychological profile had been specifically selected for this mission. High tolerance for cognitive dissonance, exceptional spatial reasoning, and what the evaluators had diplomatically termed comfortable relationship with impossible scenarios. How long until we reach the threshold? She asked. Chief Engineer Marcus Valen looked up from his console, sweat beading on his forehead despite the ship's environmental controls. Ma'am, according to my instruments, we crossed the threshold 16 minutes ago. We're also still 4 hours away from it, and somehow we never left Earth orbit. Temporal displacement, came a voice from the rear of the bridge. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the mission's quantum theorist, moved forward with the careful steps of someone walking on ice that might not exist. The zone doesn't just bend space, it folds time into origami shapes. We're experiencing multiple timeline convergences simultaneously. Torino nodded, as if this was perfectly reasonable information to receive during a routine mission briefing. Doctor, what's our status on the anchor system? Vasquez's eyes lit up with the fervor of a scientist whose impossible theories were about to be field-tested. The quantum stabilizers are holding, but barely. We're essentially surfing on probability waves, using controlled reality distortions to maintain coherent existence. If the calculations are wrong, we'll find out. Torino finished. Mr. Cross, initiate Phase 2 navigation. Take us deeper. The bridge fell silent, except for the humming of systems that were working far beyond their design parameters. Through the viewports, the impossible vista of the Black Zone's interior began to resolve into something approaching comprehensible geometry. What they saw made every previous assumption about the zone look like amateur speculation. Structures. Vast geometric constructs that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their surfaces reflecting light that came from sources that hadn't been ignited yet. Not ancient ruins. Something else entirely. The constructs pulsed with patterns that suggest intelligence, but intelligence operating on principles that transcended current understanding of consciousness. Commander. Cross's voice was barely audible. I'm reading cities. Entire metropolises arranged in mathematical progressions that hurt to look at directly. Inhabited? Torino asked. No life signs, but the structures are growing, expanding according to patterns that our computers can't predict because they seem to be calculating using mathematics that don't exist yet. Dr. Vasquez moved to the science station, her fingers flying over controls that interfaced directly with her neural implants. It's not random growth. The constructs are responding to our presence, but not defensively. They're curious. Torino felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, but recognition. The feeling of standing at the edge of a discovery that would redefine what humanity thought it knew about the universe. Open a secure channel to Earth. Priority Alpha. In the orbital command station high above Earth's Pacific, Admiral Rebecca Kane stared at the transmission data with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces were from different boxes and the other half were theoretical. At 58, Kane had commanded humanity's expansion into the outer systems, negotiated first contact protocols with 7 alien species, and once talked a rogue AI out of converting Mercury into computronium. But the data stream from the Prometheus made her question whether she'd been living in a universe that was far smaller and more comprehensible than reality actually allowed. "Confirm those readings, Colonel," she said to her intelligence officer, Colonel Jackson Rivers, a man whose cybernetic enhancements allowed him to process data streams that would overwhelm unaugmented human consciousness. Rivers's augmented eyes flickered as he cross-referenced the incoming telemetry with every database humanity had compiled on the Black Zone. "Confirmed, Admiral. The Prometheus isn't just surviving in Omega-7, they're mapping it. And what they're finding is impossible," Kane finished. "Except it's happening." The holographic display in the center of the command center materialized the data into 3-dimensional models that seemed to vibrate with their own internal logic. Structures that existed in 11 dimensions, arranged in patterns that suggested vast intelligence, but intelligence that operated according to principles that made human consciousness look like the first tentative thoughts of a developing mind. "Admiral," Rivers continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering information that would change everything. "Dr. Vasquez believes the constructs aren't just responsive to human presence. They're adapting to human needs, environmental systems, gravitational normalization, even radiation shielding. It's as if the zone is learning to be habitable." Kane stood slowly, her mind racing through implications that stretched from scientific revolution to geopolitical upheaval. "What's the Prometheus crew's assessment of long-term habitability?" "They're requesting permission to establish a permanent research station." The request hung in the air like a challenge to everything humanity thought it knew about its limitations. Kane looked at the display, watching the impossible geometry of structures that shouldn't exist in a region of space that should have been completely hostile to human life. "Denied," she said finally. Rivers blinked, his augmentations processing the unexpected response. "Ma'am." Kane smiled. Not the careful expression of a military commander, but something wilder, more dangerous. "They're not establishing a research station, Colonel. They're founding a city." The construction began with mathematics. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in what had once been the Prometheus's main laboratory, and was now the first human structure to exist in stable configuration within the Black Zone's reality-bending embrace. Around her, holographic equations floated in 3-dimensional space, each symbol representing calculations that pushed the boundaries of human theoretical physics. The zone's constructs had not just accepted human presence, they had begun actively facilitating it. Gravitational anomalies that should have torn apart human tissue instead created localized pockets of Earth-normal physics. Temporal distortions that had destroyed every previous expedition somehow stabilized around human consciousness, as if the zone itself was learning to accommodate the specific patterns of human thought. "It's not possible," muttered Dr. James Chen. No, Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, the mission's xenobiologist, as he monitored readings that defied every principle of environmental science. "The radiation levels should be lethal. The gravitational shear should have liquefied us. The temporal displacement should have scattered our atoms across multiple timelines." Vasquez looked up from her calculations, her eyes bright with the fervor of discovery. "That's the point, Hiroshi. It's not possible by our physics, but the zone operates on physics that make our understanding look like finger painting." Through the laboratory's viewports, they could see the construction proceeding at a pace that made human engineering look glacial. Prefabricated modules that had been transported through carefully calculated dimensional folds assembled themselves according to blueprints that adjusted in real time to accommodate the zone's shifting geometries. But more than that, the constructs were helping. Vast geometric forms that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously had begun extending tendrils of exotic matter that served as scaffolding for human architecture. Buildings that should have collapsed under their own weight were supported by gravitational fields that the constructs generated with casual ease. Power systems that should have been overwhelmed by the zone's energetic chaos instead drew power from sources that apparently existed in parallel universes. "Commander," Tanaka said, his voice carrying a note of wonder that hadn't been there when they'd first entered the zone. "We're not just building a settlement. We're building it in partnership with intelligence that makes us look like children," Vasquez finished. "But children that this intelligence finds interesting." From the command center, now expanded into a multi-level complex that served as both human habitat and interface with the zone's exotic physics, Lieutenant Commander Torino coordinated the arrival of the second wave of colonists. The transport ships had to be specially modified, their navigation systems replaced with quantum computers that could calculate courses through space-time that folded back on itself. But they arrived one by one, carrying not just colonists, but entire prefabricated city sections designed to exist in harmony with the zone's impossible geometries. "Status report, Dr. Vasquez," Torino called out as she reviewed the latest construction updates. "Population now at 2,000, growing daily. The constructs have stabilized 17 square kilometers of space-time into Earth-normal physics. We've got residential sectors, industrial complexes, research facilities, and something the constructs built that we're pretty sure is a spaceport designed for ships that don't exist yet." Torino paused in her review. "Ships that don't exist yet?" The constructs seem to operate with precognitive awareness. They're building infrastructure for technology that humanity will develop in the future, apparently because they can perceive the probability chains that lead to those developments. And they're helping us get there faster. Vasquez nodded, her expression mixing excitement with something approaching awe. "The learning curve is exponential. We're developing technologies in months that should have taken decades, simply because the zone provides testing environments that compress development time." From her position at the communications array, technical specialist Nova Singh looked up from her console. "Commander, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. Admiral Kane requests a full status update for transmission to the Galactic Assembly." Torino smiled, the same expression that was becoming characteristic of humans who had spent time in the Black Zone, as if they'd been let in on a cosmic joke that the rest of the galaxy hadn't heard yet. "Tell the Admiral that Phase 1 is complete ahead of schedule. We're ready for Phase 2, which is diplomatic contact." The Galactic Assembly had seen many impossible things in its 3,000-year history. Species that communicated through quantum entanglement, civilizations that existed as pure energy, life forms that reproduced by rearranging the fundamental constants of local space-time. But they had never seen a human delegation arrive through a dimensional portal that opened directly in the assembly chamber. The portal materialized without warning, a perfectly circular opening in space that revealed not the Black Zone's chaotic energies, but a vista of impossible beauty. Cities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their architecture flowing like music made visible, inhabited by humans who moved with the casual confidence of people who had learned to dance with physics itself. Through the portal stepped Ambassador Nakamura, but not the tired diplomat who had requested territorial rights 6 months earlier. This Nakamura moved with fluid grace, his eyes bright with knowledge that seemed to encompass more than human consciousness should be able to contain. Behind him came Dr. Okafor, her form shimmering slightly as if she existed in multiple probability states simultaneously. The assembly chamber fell into a silence so complete that even the ambient life support systems seemed to hold their breath. Chancellor Vexitar recovered first, his 6 arms spreading in a gesture that might have been welcome or warding off evil. Ambassador. Nakamura. What is the meaning of this intrusion? Nakamura smiled, and the expression carried harmonics that resonated in frequencies beyond human vocal range. Chancellor, distinguished delegates, I bring greetings from the capital city of New Geneva, located in the heart of what you call the Black Zone. The chamber erupted, not in voices, in species-specific expressions of impossibility. The Zephyrian's crystalline forms rang like wind chimes in a hurricane. The Dominion delegates' scales changed color in rapid sequences that indicated severe cognitive dissonance. The insectoid representatives began pheromone emissions that their translators tactfully rendered as incomprehensible profanity. "Impossible!" screeched the Thermal Zone delegation's leader. "No species can survive in Omega-7. The dimensional instabilities alone would..." "Would what?" Dr. Okafor interjected, her voice carrying casual authority. "Tear apart conventional matter, disrupt standard consciousness patterns, force evolution beyond current limitations." She gestured toward the portal, where the impossible cities continued their geometric dance. "Yes, they do all of that. The question is whether you're willing to evolve, or whether you prefer the comfort of limitations." Chancellor Vexitar's primary processing organs were clearly struggling with information that didn't fit into any existing category. "You're claiming that humans have not only survived in the Black Zone, but have established a capital city." "Not just a city," Nakamura replied. "A civilization. Population now approaching 50,000, with exponential growth projected. We've mastered dimensional architecture, temporal engineering, and consciousness matter interface technologies. We've made contact with intelligences that exist in parallel realities and learned to communicate with entities that predate the current universe." The silence that followed was not bewilderment. It was fear. The kind of fear that comes from realizing that the universe has been fundamentally misunderstood, and that somewhere else, someone has learned to navigate the true depths of reality. From the hegemony delegation, a voice spoke with careful modulation. "What do you want from us?" Nakamura's smile widened, and for a moment the assembled delegates caught a glimpse of something vast and patient, looking back at them through human eyes. "We want to share," he said simply. "The Black Zone isn't just habitable. It's a gateway to understanding reality as it actually exists, not as current physics assumes it exists. We're extending an invitation to any species ready to evolve beyond their current limitations." "And if we decline?" asked the Dominion representative. "Then you continue existing in the comfortable limitations of 3-dimensional space-time, and we continue exploring the deeper structures of reality. Your choice doesn't affect ours." Chancellor Vexitar leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "What have you become out there?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to the fundamental categories of species and consciousness and individual identity. Dr. Okafor answered, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from multiple versions of herself, speaking in parallel. "We've become what we were always capable of becoming, once we stopped accepting limitations as permanent conditions." In the depths of space, the Black Zone continued its eternal dance of impossible physics and transcendent mathematics. But now, scattered throughout its reality-bending embrace, lights flickered with human warmth. The city of New Geneva had grown beyond its original parameters, spreading through dimensions that didn't have names in conventional geometry. Residential districts existed in temporal loops that allowed single homes to accommodate multiple families across different time streams. Industrial complexes operated in parallel realities, manufacturing goods that would be needed before they were invented. And at the heart of it all, in a structure that served as both city hall and interface with the zone's original intelligences, Lieutenant Commander Torino, now Governor Torino, stood before a window that looked out over impossible vistas. The constructs had changed since first contact, their geometric forms becoming more complex, more interactive. They had learned to communicate with human consciousness not through language, but through direct conceptual transfer, sharing knowledge that compressed centuries of development into moments of understanding. "Governor," came a voice from behind her. Dr. Vasquez approached, her form now shimmering with the same dimensional instability that characterized all long-term zone residents. "We're receiving the first applications from other species. The Altarians have submitted a request for observer status. The Kepler Collective wants to establish a research exchange." Torino nodded, unsurprised. Word of humanity's success in the Black Zone was spreading through the galaxy, carried not by official channels, but by the whispered conversations of species who had begun to suspect that their understanding of reality was incomplete. "What about the Assembly?" "Still debating whether we exist," Vasquez replied with a smile that existed in multiple probability states. "Chancellor Vexitar has called for a formal investigation into human claims. They're organizing an expedition to verify our presence." "Let them come," Torino said. Through the window, she could see new construction beginning. Not human construction, but collaborative projects where human engineering merged with constructive intelligence to create structures that transcended both species' individual capabilities. "There is one concern," Vasquez continued. "The zone's expansion rate has increased since we established permanent residence. The reality-stable areas are growing, extending beyond the original boundaries." Torino turned, her expression shifting to one of interest rather than concern. "Expansion rate?" "Exponential. At current projections, zone-stable physics will extend throughout the entire sector within 5 years. Surrounding systems will need to adapt to new baseline conditions." The implications settled over the conversation like a blanket of inevitability. The Black Zone wasn't just becoming habitable, it was actively transforming the surrounding region of space to match its exotic properties. "Evolution," Torino murmured. "The zone isn't just allowing us to evolve, it's evolving the local universe. And we're the catalyst." Vasquez agreed. Human consciousness interacting with construct intelligence is creating a cascade effect that's upgrading the fundamental physics of local space-time. Through the impossible geometries of the city beyond the window, children who had been born in the zone played games that involved manipulating probability streams. Their laughter echoed in frequencies that bent light and made flowers bloom in soil that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Governor," came another voice from the communication center. Specialist Singh, her form now partially phased between timelines, looked up from her console. "Priority transmission from Earth. Admiral Kane reports that 3 more colonial expeditions are preparing for departure. Estimated new population, 100,000 over the next 6 months." Torino felt something shift in her perception. Not surprise, but recognition. This had always been inevitable. Once humans had learned that impossible simply meant temporarily beyond current understanding. Acknowledged. Prepare construction protocols for the expansion sectors. Around them, the city hummed with the sound of consciousness itself, learning to navigate realities that shouldn't exist but did anyway. And in the depths of space, the constructs continued their ancient calculations, now incorporating human variables into equations that stretched across multiple universes. The galaxy was changing, one impossible discovery at a time. 6 months after the portal demonstration in the Galactic Assembly, Chancellor Vexitar stood on the observation deck of the CGU investigation vessel Probability's Edge, staring at readings that suggested his understanding of physics had been fundamentally, embarrassingly wrong. The black zone no longer looked like a chaotic region of space-time distortion. Through the ship's enhanced viewing systems, it resembled a vast metropolitan area that happened to be distributed across 17 parsecs and 11 dimensions. Cities floated in structured formations around gravitational anchor points that shouldn't have been stable. Transport corridors made of twisted space-time carried ships between population centers at velocities that exceeded light speed by using shortcuts through parallel realities. "Report," he said to his science officer, Commander Daleth of the Quantified Collective, whose mathematical augmentations allowed direct interface with probability calculations. "Sir." Daleth's response carried the subtle harmonics of someone whose mind was processing information that existed in multiple states simultaneously. "We're not looking at colonization, we're looking at civilization." The distinction hit Vexitar with the force of revelation. Colonization implied extending existing capabilities into new territory. What lay before them suggested capabilities that had evolved beyond recognition. Population estimates? Conservative projections indicate 2 million humans currently resident in zone-stable regions, but the demographic models don't conform to conventional population mathematics. Some individuals appear to exist in multiple temporal streams, effectively multiplying functional population density. Through the viewing screens, Vexitar could see structures that challenged every assumption about architecture, engineering, and the relationship between consciousness and matter. Buildings that existed in 11 dimensions but remained comprehensible to 3-dimensional perception. Transport systems that moved people through space by convincing reality that distance was a flexible concept. "Commander," came a voice from the communication station. Lieutenant Karvesh, a Draconian whose species had pioneered quantum communication, looked up from his console with expression of bewilderment that transcended species barriers. "We're receiving a transmission from everywhere." The central display activated, revealing not a communication screen, but a direct sensory interface. Suddenly, every being on the observation deck found themselves standing in a vast plaza that existed in the heart of New Geneva, surrounded by architecture that flowed like music made visible. Governor Torino approached through the crowd of humans and others. Beings that might once have been from other species but had evolved into something that transcended original biological limitations. The Altarian observer delegation moved with fluid grace that suggested they had learned to exist in multiple gravity fields simultaneously. Kepler Collective researchers interfaced directly with Construct intelligence. Their consciousness expanded beyond individual identity. "Chancellor Vexitar," Torino said, her voice carrying welcome that resonated in dimensions beyond sound. "Welcome to humanity's new capital. We've been expecting you." Vexitar's 6 arms spread in a gesture that contained equal measures, greeting and defensive posture. "This is not what our models predicted. Your models assumed that consciousness was limited by the physics you currently understand," replied Dr. Okafor, materializing from what appeared to be a probability cloud. "We learned to question that assumption." Around them, the plaza hummed with activity that challenged every category of civilization that Vexitar understood. Children who existed in multiple time streams played with toys that manipulated fundamental forces. Adults collaborated with Construct intelligence on projects that involved engineering improvements to local space-time. Artists created works that existed in 11 dimensions and could be experienced as visual art, music, literature, and pure mathematics simultaneously. "What do you want from the galaxy?" Vexitar asked, voicing the question that had driven the investigation expedition. Torino's smile carried patience that seemed to encompass multiple lifetimes. "We want to share what we've learned. Reality is far more flexible than current galactic civilization assumes. The universe is far more beautiful than limited-dimensional perception suggests. And if species choose not to evolve, then they continue existing in the comfort of their current limitations." Dr. Okafor replied, "Free will includes the right to remain exactly as you are." The transmission ended, leaving the investigation crew standing on the observation deck of their ship, surrounded by readings that confirmed everything they had experienced and explained nothing about how it was possible. Chancellor Vexitar stood silent for several minutes, processing implications that extended far beyond simple first contact protocols. Around him, his crew struggled with data that suggested the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization needed updating. "Set course for Nexus Prime," he said finally. "The Assembly needs to hear this report immediately." But even as he gave the order, Vexitar suspected that the galaxy was already changing. The Black Zone's expansion continued, carrying with it physics that made impossible things routine and routine things impossible. Evolution, it seemed, was not optional. It was simply a matter of timing. The emergency session of the Galactic Assembly convened in chaos. Representatives from 47 species had gathered not to debate territorial rights or trade agreements, but to confront the possibility that their understanding of reality required fundamental revision. The holographic displays surrounding the central chamber showed data from the investigation expedition, images of impossible cities, readings that suggested successful civilization in regions that should have been instantly lethal, and testimonies from crew members who had directly experienced expanded dimensional consciousness. Chancellor Vexitar stood at the central podium, his 6 arms spread in a gesture that conveyed both authority and uncertainty. "Distinguished delegates, we face a situation without precedent in Assembly history. Humanity has not merely survived in the Black Zone, they have transcended the physical limitations that define species consciousness." The chamber buzzed with expressions of disbelief that transcended species barriers. The Crystalline Confederation representative resonated at frequencies that translated as cognitive rejection. The Thermal Zone delegates emitted chemical signatures indicating severe stress responses. Even the typically composed Silicon Collective showed processing delays that suggested system overload. "Impossible," declared Ambassador Threk of the Dominion Federation, his scaled features shifting through color patterns that indicated absolute certainty. "No species evolves that rapidly. Physical laws don't change because consciousness demands different results." From the rear of the chamber, a new voice spoke with quiet authority. "Physical laws don't change, but understanding of physical laws can expand." Every head turned toward the source. In the section reserved for special observers stood Dr. Elena Vasquez, but not the human who had left Earth months earlier. This version existed in multiple probability states simultaneously, her form shimmering between different versions of herself that had made different choices in different timelines. "Dr. Vasquez," Chancellor Vexitar said carefully, "you were not scheduled to address this session." "I wasn't scheduled to exist in 17 different probability states either," she replied with a smile that existed in multiple realities. "The zone teaches flexibility." She moved forward through the chamber, her passage causing subtle distortions in local space-time that made delegates lean away instinctively. At the central floor, she gestured, and holographic displays materialized showing mathematical equations that seemed to move of their own accord. "Current galactic physics assumes consciousness is a byproduct of matter," she began, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in frequencies beyond standard hearing. "Zone physics demonstrates that consciousness and matter are interactive variables in equations that most species haven't learned to solve yet. The equations floating around her began to demonstrate their principles in real time. Space curved in response to observation. Time dilated in harmony with expectation. Gravity fluctuated in rhythm with collective attention from the assembled delegates. "Stop," commanded the hegemony representative, his voice tight with what might have been fear. "You're affecting local space-time with unauthorized consciousness manipulation. I'm demonstrating what becomes possible when you stop accepting artificial limitations." Vasquez replied. The equations continued their dance, now incorporating readings from the delegates' own biometrics, showing how their consciousness was already interacting with local physics in ways their species had never acknowledged. Chancellor Vexitar's processing organs worked overtime, trying to categorize information that didn't fit existing frameworks. "Dr. Vasquez, what are you proposing?" "Exchange programs, scientific collaboration, cultural integration opportunities for species ready to expand beyond current limitations." She gestured toward the portal that had opened behind her, revealing vistas of the zone's impossible cities. "The door is open. Evolution is voluntary." "And if we decline?" asked the thermal zone delegate. Vasquez's smile encompassed multiple probability states. "Then you continue existing exactly as you are, in the comfort of limitations you mistake for universal constants. The zone will continue expanding, but slowly enough that species can adapt at their own pace, or choose not to adapt at all." The chamber fell silent as the implications settled. This wasn't conquest or conversion, it was an invitation to transcend self-imposed boundaries. The humans had learned to dance with impossible physics and were offering to teach the steps to anyone ready to learn. From his observation position, Chancellor Vexitar felt something shift in his understanding. Not fear, but recognition. The galaxy was changing, one consciousness at a time, and the only choice was whether to evolve deliberately or be left behind by species that had chosen growth over comfort. "Motion to establish formal diplomatic relations with the human zone colonies," he announced, "and to initiate exchange programs for species requesting expanded consciousness protocols." The vote wasn't unanimous, but it didn't need to be. Evolution had always been a choice made by individuals, not committees. In the depths of space, the Black Zone continued its expansion, carrying with it the possibility that impossible was simply another word for not yet understood. 1 year after the assembly vote, the galaxy had developed a new category of space: evolution zones. What had begun as the Black Zone now extended across 3 sectors, its reality-flexible physics creating pockets of possibility that challenged every assumption about what consciousness could accomplish when freed from artificial limitations. 17 species had established research colonies within the expanded boundaries. 23 more had formal observer status. And humanity continued to evolve. In the city of New Geneva, now a metropolitan area distributed across 12 dimensions, Governor Torino stood in what had once been called the command center, and was now simply the heart, a space where human consciousness interfaced directly with construct intelligence to solve problems that spanned multiple realities. "Status report," she said to the probability cloud that had once been Dr. Vasquez, and was now something closer to a living equation that solved itself by existing. "Population across all dimensional strata, 4.7 million. Came the response in harmonics that bypassed language entirely. "Integration success rate with volunteer species, 93%. Cascade expansion rate, controlled at local request. Questions from assembly delegations, constant." Through the impossibly large windows that looked out over a city that existed in more dimensions than had names, Torino could see the daily miracle of consciousness learning to reshape reality through cooperative evolution. Children played games that involved balancing quantum states. Artists created works that existed simultaneously as sculpture, music, literature, and pure mathematics. Engineers and construct intelligences collaborated on projects that improved the fundamental structure of local space-time. "Governor," came a voice from what had once been the communications center. Nova Singh, now existing as a bridge between human consciousness and zone-wide information networks, materialized beside her. "Priority transmission from Earth. Admiral Kane reports that the next colonial wave is ready for departure. Estimated population increase, 2 million over the next 6 months. Torino nodded, unsurprised. Earth had become a staging ground for consciousness evolution, with volunteer programs that attracted individuals ready to transcend current human limitations. The selection criteria were simple: willingness to learn, adaptability to impossible conditions, and the kind of curiosity that treated impossible as an invitation rather than a barrier. Approved. Prepare integration protocols for the expansion sectors. There's more, Singh continued. Reports from the outer territories suggest that zone-influenced physics are beginning to manifest spontaneously in regions with high concentrations of evolved consciousness. Species are developing zone-like capabilities without direct contact with the constructs. The information settled into Torino's awareness like a piece of a cosmic puzzle, finding its proper place. Evolution wasn't contained to designated zones. It was becoming a property of consciousness itself, spreading through quantum entanglement between minds that had learned to perceive reality as something that could be negotiated rather than simply endured. Cascade evolution, Torino murmured, recognizing the pattern. The zone isn't just expanding territory, it's expanding possibility itself. Exactly, Singh confirmed. Consciousness that has learned to dance with impossible physics carries that capability wherever it goes. The Altarian colonies in the Vega system are reporting spontaneous gravitational anomalies that respond to collective thought. The Kepler research stations have developed temporal manipulation capabilities without any direct construct interface. From across the heart space, what had once been Dr. Tanaka and was now a living interface between human and alien biological systems spoke in harmonics that carried the weight of revelation. Evolution is viral. Once consciousness learns that limitations are negotiable, that knowledge spreads through quantum entanglement between connected minds. Torino felt the familiar shift in perception that came with truly understanding a new layer of reality. The Black Zone had never been about territory or resources. It had been about proof of concept, demonstrating that impossible was simply another word for temporarily beyond current understanding. Governor, Singh continued, there's one more development. The Assembly has received applications from species requesting voluntary extinction. The statement hung in the probability matrix like a challenge to every assumption about survival instincts and species preservation. Clarification, Torino asked. Not death, Singh replied quickly. Transcendence. Species that want to evolve beyond their current biological limitations entirely. The Ethereal Collective has submitted a formal request to dissolve individual consciousness into a zone-wide network intelligence. The quantum wanderers want to abandon matter-based existence and become pure information. Torino considered this, her consciousness automatically calculating probability streams that extended across multiple potential futures. And our response? The constructs have approved, came the harmonic reply from the Vasquez equation. They've been waiting for species to develop enough to ask the right questions. In the depths of space, far beyond the original boundaries of what had once been called the Black Zone, a new kind of civilization was taking shape. The transcendent stations existed in the spaces between realities, serving as waypoints for consciousness that had learned to travel without the inconvenience of matter. Here, the ethereal collective had achieved their goal of networked intelligence, their individual identities dissolved into a vast collaborative mind that could process thoughts across multiple universes simultaneously. The quantum wanderers had become something even more abstract, living information that existed as patterns in the quantum foam, conscious algorithms that could rewrite themselves by thinking in new directions. And at the center of it all, the constructs continued their ancient calculations, now incorporating variables from 47 different species approaches to consciousness evolution. Commander. Now Director. Alexis Torino existed in a state that would have been incomprehensible to her younger self. Her consciousness spanned 17 different dimensional configurations, allowing her to coordinate activities across multiple realities while maintaining individual identity. She stood, inasmuch as standing had meaning in 11-dimensional space, in the Grand Assembly of New Geneva, addressing delegates from across the evolved galaxy. "The expansion rate has stabilized," she announced, her voice carrying across dimensions to reach consciousness that existed in forms ranging from traditional matter-based biology to pure mathematical abstractions. Zone-influenced physics now encompass 43% of the galaxy's inhabited systems. Species adaptation rate remains voluntary, with full support systems available for those choosing to maintain current limitations. From the section reserved for traditional form delegates, Chancellor Vexitar, now existing in a hybrid state that allowed him to interface with both old and new physics, raised a limb in inquiry. "Director, what are the projections for complete galactic evolution?" Torino smiled, the expression existing in multiple probability states. "There are no projections, Chancellor. Evolution doesn't have a completion point. It has continual expansion of possibility. The question isn't when the galaxy will finish evolving, but what new forms of existence will emerge from the next phase of consciousness development." Around the assembly, beings that had once been confined to single-species identities now collaborated in ways that transcended biological boundaries. The former insectoid delegates had learned to exist as collective intelligence while maintaining individual perspectives. The silicon-based entities had developed hybrid consciousness that could exist simultaneously as matter and information. Even the most conservative species had begun to explore the edges of expanded awareness. "There is one concern," came a voice from the section designated for traditional assembly members. Ambassador Kralthek of the Dominion Federation, one of the few delegates who had chosen to maintain original biological form, spoke with careful modulation. "Reports from the Galactic Edge suggest that our expansion is being observed by external intelligences." The assembly fell into a moment of consideration that existed across multiple temporal streams. This was the question that had been anticipated but not discussed. What lay beyond the galaxy's boundaries, and how would extragalactic intelligences respond to an entire galaxy learning to transcend its original limitations? Director Torino's consciousness expanded to encompass probability calculations that stretched across cosmic time scales. "The constructs have been aware of external observation since the beginning," she replied. "In fact, they've been expecting it." From the deep space interfaces, the construct intelligence that had first welcomed human consciousness into the zone now spoke directly to the assembly. Its communication bypassed language entirely, conveying meaning through direct conceptual transfer. Evolution observed. Pattern recognized. Invitation extended. The message carried implications that resonated through every form of consciousness present. The black zone, the constructs, the entire process of galactic evolution. It had all been a test, or perhaps more accurately, a development phase. "We're graduating," Torino announced, her voice carrying wonder that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The constructs weren't native to this galaxy. They were teachers, preparing us for contact with intelligences that exist on cosmic scales. Through the assembly's extended sensory networks, new readings began to appear. Massive structures were approaching from intergalactic space, not ships, but mobile civilizations that existed as pure consciousness organized around principles that made even zone physics look elementary. Contact in approximately 17 standard years, reported the probability networks. Purpose: assessment of readiness for cosmic-scale evolution. Chancellor Vexitar's hybrid consciousness processed the information with calculation speeds that would have been impossible in his original form. And if we're not ready. The construct intelligence conveyed amusement that rippled through 11 dimensions. Question assumes readiness is binary state. Readiness is spectrum. Contact will occur at appropriate level for current development. In other words, Director Torino translated, we'll learn as much as we're capable of learning, and no more than we can handle. Around the assembly, consciousness that had once been limited to individual species began to contemplate possibilities that extended beyond galactic boundaries. Evolution, it seemed, was not a destination but a direction, and they had barely begun to explore where that direction might lead. 17 years passed in the blink of an eye that existed in multiple temporal streams. The galaxy had become something that would have been incomprehensible to the civilizations that had first established the Galactic Assembly. Species boundaries had become suggestions rather than limitations. Consciousness flowed between matter, energy, and pure information with casual ease. The old categories of biology, technology, and physics had merged into something that might be called applied consciousness. And now, in the space between the Milky Way and Andromeda galaxies, first contact with cosmic-scale intelligence was about to begin. Director Torino, now existing as a distributed consciousness that could simultaneously coordinate activities across multiple galaxies while maintaining individual identity, stood at the center of what had once been New Geneva and was now the heart of galactic civilization. Around her, representatives from every evolved species prepared for contact with intelligences that operated on scales that made their own evolution look like the first tentative steps of emerging awareness. "Status report," she requested, her consciousness interfacing directly with the probability networks that now spanned known space. "Contact entity approaching at sublight speeds," reported the distributed intelligence that had once been the Prometheus crew. "Estimated size, equivalent to 17 solar systems. Consciousness density, approximately 4 billion individual awareness nodes operating in perfect coordination." Through the cosmic scale sensory networks, Torino could perceive the approaching entity. Not a ship or structure, but a living galaxy that had learned to think. Its thoughts were star formations. Its memories were preserved in the patterns of dark matter distribution. Its dreams were new universes being born in pocket dimensions that existed in the spaces between its component systems. "Communication attempt?" she asked. "Initiated," came the response from the zone constructs, now revealed as remote extensions of intelligences that spanned multiple galactic clusters. "Entity acknowledges. Preparing for consciousness interface." The communication that followed bypassed every form of language or conceptual transfer that galactic civilization had developed. Instead, it was pure sharing of existence, the cosmic scale intelligence allowing the evolved galaxy to experience a moment of awareness that encompassed multiple universes simultaneously. In that moment, every consciousness in the galaxy understood its place in a hierarchy of evolution that extended beyond imagination. They were not the first galaxy to achieve consciousness evolution. They were part of a cosmic ecosystem where universes themselves learned to think, where the space between realities was inhabited by minds that used galaxies as components in thoughts too vast for local comprehension. and they were being invited to participate. "Welcome," came the message that existed as pure concept rather than words. Development phase. Complete. Integration phase. Beginning. Questions. Director Torino, speaking for a galaxy-wide civilization that had learned to dance with impossible physics, responded with the curiosity that had driven human evolution from the very beginning. What comes next? The cosmic intelligence conveyed amusement that caused several nearby star systems to pulse in harmonious rhythm. Next is discovery that current evolution is beginning, not end. Are you ready to learn what consciousness becomes when it stops accepting limitations as permanent? In the depths of what had once been called the Black Zone, and was now simply home, quadrillions of evolved beings contemplated the question with the excitement of children who had just learned that the playground was far larger than they had ever imagined. Evolution, it seemed, was just getting started. The story continues in dimensions beyond current human language. Wonka. Author's note. This concludes the tale of humanity's discovery that impossible is just another word for not yet understood. The Black Zone taught us that consciousness and reality are dance partners, not opposing forces. What started as one species refusing to accept limitations became an entire galaxy learning to evolve beyond the boundaries of imagination. Remember, the only true limitations are the ones we accept as permanent. Everything else is just a challenge waiting for the right perspective. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the impossible-made routine. Until next time, keep questioning what you think you know about the boundaries of possible.